Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening, depending where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. At the outset, I'd like to introduce the Market Research Society of India, MRSI. We are the Indian Association for Market Research. We've been around for 35 years odd, and we are doing a lot of things, and we're delighted to be there with you at this particular event to have this fantastic panel discussion on a topic that's very, very dear to our heart, which is the humane impact going beyond research. Let me introduce to you our panelists today. We have Ayushi Sharma, Associate Director at Ipsos India. We have Nandita Singh, AVP and Culture Engine at Purple Audacity, a fast-growing, homegrown insights consultancy. And we have Paru Minocha, who's Managing Director and also Head-Qualitative and Sustainability Transformation Practice at Kantar, India, and also current President at the MRSI. I am Mitali Chowhan. I am the Director General of the MRSI and have done a lot of work in India and abroad. And I think I'm delighted to have an opportunity to moderate our fantastic panel today. Before we kick off our discussion, I think it's worth taking a minute to thank ESOMA, because it's really thanks to them we have this marvelous platform where all of us can get together across the globe and be there on our very own day, the International Market Research Day. This year's theme is celebrating research, and it's about the joys and achievements in market research and illustrating its pivotal role in fostering a sustainable and informed world. At MRSI, we also believe it's an important agenda for the Indian research and insights industry to focus on being sustainable. And an example of this is at our Golden Key Awards. We have 15 odd awards. And of course, some of the awards are about business impact. But we really see that when we're looking at our strategy as an association, our strategy for the industry, one of our strategic pillars is building pride. And many of our awards are not only about business, but are about people. And one of the most keenly contested and fiercely contested ones is our most humane organization. And I'm very, very happy to say that we have Nandita with us today, who was the winner of our most recent Most Humane Organization. And we also have Ayushi, who was one of the finalists in the same year, which was 2023. So kicking off our discussion today, let's just go around the table and talk about what being humane triggers in our industry. Paru, would you like to tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mitali. Very, very excited to be here, and especially for the topic that we're here. And I think for MRSI, we've been focusing as one of our key strategy pillars is actually to look at building pride, and building pride in our industry starts from a very humane angle. It is an emotional connect. It is a connect which every day sort of resonates with being happy to be here as well as building a career here. So when I look at what does humane really trigger, it's quite interesting because the key point is we are in a people's business. It's not about a manufacturing. We are people, largely a people-based business, and our craft and our expertise, our everyday work is about understanding human truths. So if we don't start with humane in our industry, where else will we start? I mean, it's really the key point. And therefore, it's very, very fundamental to start within. And that's one of the reasons this award was even set up, because we've got to look within and say, how can we get more humane? And we also know Gen Z, right? They are looking at companies differently, at their work lives differently. And it is a very important aspect when it comes to joining or staying with a company. So of course, like Mitali said, commercial success is important, and obviously all of us are in organizations which look at that, but we need to balance it with a humane outlook. And being humane to me is not just about well-being, which is physical or mental, but it also is about balance and control over your day, because we give our lives almost to our work, and we need to have a balance. When you spend so much of time on your job, it's also very important about sparking joy, or enjoyment, or love for the craft. So there's a lot of how can you build the capability, how can you build the development, so that people want to, you become magnets for people to join you as well as stay. We know a lot of people join, but we also know that a lot of people can leave. And how do we change that game internally? And I think finally enabling a large part of being humane is, I wouldn't call it self-actualization, but it is to meet the career progression goals that individuals have. Building their capability, building their leadership skills, preparing them for the tomorrow, and also always on a bedrock of integrity, so that we are known not just for our craft, but also for doing it right, and doing it right the first time. So very, very excited about actually the topic itself.
Right. What do you feel, the others?
I think I'd like to come in here and thank you, Mitali, for that brilliant introduction. Very excited to be talking about a topic that we're all collectively passionate about. And for me, I think when our organization or the industry thinks about being humane, it's about people first growth. And we've found that building culture and everything that it therefore underpins essentially drives the way that we do business. So the business is numbers, and the business is what we get done, but how we get it done is what we are focused on in terms of culture, and that is where being humane and how to be humane comes in. I think one of the things that we've been thinking about is the fact that the way work is paced today, and so much of this Paru was just talked about, there is a risk of growth leaving people behind. And so I think it's about making sure that people are at the center of what we're doing, because we're in a people's business, like Paru said. And our understanding has been that this underpins everything that we do. It's not just, culture isn't just about having a set of values on the wall. It's about the fact that it becomes much more critical in an industry where we are built on cultural intelligence, on knowledge, on communication, so many of these softer aspects which are daunting to navigate. And we do have an increasingly younger workforce. So it's also about enabling everybody who comes in and everybody who's already been there to be able to embody those values, or at least resonate with them, sometimes even disagree with them, but at least it creates a platform where we can come together and understand what being humane means to us, whether it's the way we engage with one another, whether it is the way we set boundaries, it's the way that the personalities that we look for, or the traits we look for in the people we want to add on to the workforce we have. And much like Paru said, also the way that we think about individual growth and how to make that growth participative. We know that it is a much more engaged and a much more involved workforce.
Thanks,
Right.
Nandita.
Again, thanks, Mitali, for choosing the topic, which is very close to all of our hearts. So, people is something which is a very centric or very core of any organization. Having said that, particularly talking about the MR industry, like we have been making advancement in terms of using AI technology, automation, and all. But people will remain the core. The people will not be replaceable per se. The element of people is very important. However, how much progressive we are. At the same time, being talking about the human touch topic, it's beyond the social, mental, or emotional well-being, or the total well-being that we talk about. It's imparting that empathy to people, understanding their small needs, trusting them, building that interpersonal relationships is very important for any organization. Like we have been talking about a lot of initiatives all organizations are following, but to reach out to that touch, to kind of have that personal touch with the people is very important. So I would say that true inclusivity is all about being human in the right way and to leave no one behind.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's a brilliant kickoff, and thanks so much for that. When we're talking about sustainability, and I think that is also part of being humane at some level, you think about being planet positive, and and I think this April was an April unprecedented in terms of some of what we've heard back from our planet in terms of the weather, in terms of rain, in terms of everything, and we've seen a lot of it all over India as we go into election. We see how the critical state our planet is in. So, as an industry, when we talk about being planet positive, um, I think for several years now in India, all of our organizations and those we work with have it on their agenda. And even at MRSI, we can say that for a couple of years now, we've had it, and on our agenda, whether we're looking at how we come to work or we're looking at the events we organize. And Paru, I was wondering if you want to share a bit more about this.
Yeah, so I think in my introduction, you did say I look after the sustainability, and that's why I've been living with it for the last 3-4 years and feel very, very passionately about it. And I think we need an integrated approach. There is a little bit of skepticism, but I will park that for now and maybe come back to it later. But we need an integrated approach where I think there are 3 layers. We as individuals, we as companies, and then we in our work, what we can do. And I think we're seeing now, whether that's legislative or voluntary, we are seeing a change in our consumers, right? Plastic got banned. We got used to carrying our own bags when we go shopping. It's a pleasure to see people carry their own bottles of water so that they're not buying plastic bottles. Recycling in societies and buildings has come a long way. And there are, of course, people on the continuum who are far more advanced and some people who are getting onto it. And it doesn't really matter why you get onto it as long as your practice becomes sustainable. And that's at an individual level. I think even at a company level, it's very important. And I'm so glad the world over in our valuation is looking at how sustainable we are. Everybody has goals. Legislation in India will not be far behind. So, that's good incentive. But it's not a takeoff. There has to be some integration in the approach that you're doing. So, for example, in our case, one of the things that we do is that have new joinees plant a tree. Now, whether that's a token or not, that's not important. But 500 trees get planted, which were not planted earlier by our company. So that I think is important. It's a step in the right direction. And it's also important to remember that sustainability is not just environment, it's not just climate, it is a whole host of other things. It's the SDG goals are social and environmental. So it really is ESG. So in fact, like even if you look at within our businesses, what do? We equip our people for life, right? We give them training, we empower them to stay, earn a living, and carry forward with the intellectuals as well as financial goals, right? That's what we do. Even that we can take it forward. And for example, in our company, the CSR is underpinned with vocational. We don't want to do a one-off metric where we engage with you, but we want to equip you for life. So how can I improve your tomorrows forever than what your today is, if that's the goal? And I think the most exciting is, because we do work in human truths, what can we do with our brands and clients and corporates, and really use our expertise to enable them to be sustainable? And there are experts who help them with the packaging, etc. But what to do about the brand is something that I think our industry has a lot of, large role to play. And when you work across brands and when you do consumer research, consumers are asking brands to be more responsible. So they may not choose you because you're responsible and pay a premium for it, but they will definitely reject you if you're not responsible. So it's quite important to keep that in mind. And the ask is fairly nuanced. It's very obvious of, waste and packaging, etc. Very obvious ones. If you do online shopping, it's very obvious to see that what are the areas that you can work on, and many companies are working on it. But it's also nuanced. So when we look at the ask category wise, I just want to take a couple of examples. Like when we look at hygiene asks and differentiators which brands can adopt, and from the alcohol category, the highest ask is actually against to protect women against violence. And I really like that data because the category itself lends itself to promoting that violence in a way. It creates an environment where many parts of the society, women go through that violence. So the ask from the category itself is, what are you going to do, or which brand is going to take that up? And I think that's quite sustainable. The other thing is in e-commerce, like packaging, I've said is an obvious one, but where you can't, for example, pin a manufacturing company or a product, the ask is on child education. When you look at QSR, the ask is on child labor. So I'm saying that, I mean, I strongly feel that the Indian consumer is not far behind and may be quite evolved as compared to global, and is asking now, how fast will the brands do it, how authentically they will do it, because the consumers will know. And it's quite important to look at it. And I think the integrated approach is important, and we're in a very, very good space to help brands do it as an industry.
Thanks, Paru.
To add on to what Paru said, she has beautifully kind of needled it in a kind of a thread kind of a thing. So I would say that it all starts from within. So like she mentioned, it's individual or maybe a society together and company or India at large or a community at large per se. So I think as an individual, we can take small steps towards kind of saving or encompassing in kind of saving our environment per se. So like as small as basic thing, keeping a water bowl, like we know it's hot summers, keeping a water bowl outside our boundaries for maybe birds to come and kind of have a sip in this hot summers. Also, like as an organization, how we deal with people beyond. So it's not only about, we have already talked about how we are dealing with people internally, but people externally. So we all have been partnering with different NGOs and all, but how do we kind of see the journey has been? It's not only going once, imparting knowledge or doing those sessions and coming back, but how do we see the journey is moving, how that person is. So like at Ipsos, we see that we have partnered with different NGOs. We do see how those people are doing, how they have kind of moved on in their life, the training sessions that we have done with them. So I think it's a lot more about not doing one thing, tick marking, and okay, done and dusted. But it's more about how are we faring as individuals, as an organization. That is very important, number one. Number two, like we've talked about, Paru did a very she talked about different things, different industries or different people, how they can pick up small things. So that's very, I personally feel it's how we kind of place things, how we kind of go out about it. And lastly, if I talk about what we are doing as an industry or what we are personally doing as in Ipsos, so like sharing some examples, like what we have been doing. Like I mentioned, we have partnered with different agencies, different NGOs, sorry, imparting different knowledge to them on different aspects like social life, job fairs, career counseling. We have been doing that a lot. Also, we have partnered with IIT for providing scholarship or tuition fees for certain students. And recently we did a e-waste drive. It's collecting e-waste across offices. And then we partnered with an organization where in return to it, plants were planted. So I think Paru also summarized in a way, it starts from within to the larger organization and then at the society at large. Yeah.
I think a whole lot of ground has already been covered. But I think I'd just like to maybe talk about the fact that, like Paru said, sustainability can be daunting as a subject to navigate because, like we've all said, there is a personal that comes in where each one of us has different values we resonate with when it comes to sustainability. And if sustainability extends to sustainable development, and I think while we navigate how we'd like to bring a collective sustainable vision together, one of the things that we've committed to is that we want our work to contribute to sustainable impact. And so one of the things that we've done at Audacity has been to almost check boxes on the sustainable development goals. I think we're at a level of 17 in terms of just the business that we do and what kind of organizations we want to collaborate with because we align with their vision. I think that is a critical part of how we get it done today. Of course, there is all the instances of giving back to communities that surround us, whether it is in the form of, kind or celebrations together, and those aspects continue. And yeah, that's all I wanted to chip in here.
Thanks so much. We did sort of touch upon the planet and how that's important, but I think there was a natural progression to say that you can't just put a tick called planet. It automatically goes into the space of the other sustainability goals, and also people are part of it. And I think it's arguable to say that the research and insights industry is only as good as the people we attract and retain. And I think that's something that we do look at the people that we are not able to attract, but I think by and large, we as an industry are very aware of the needs of our people, have always been. And, and with that, we know that this, of course, remuneration is part of what's important for people, but increasingly it's around work-life balance. And work-life balance was probably something people talked about a decade or so ago. But what we've now sort of taken that level ahead is to say, like, it's also saying what's happening to them mentally. What is happiness about in your place of work? What is the kind of support that an organization can give you in the mental health space? And that also is something that we look at. So I think what we were, when we were just meeting to sort of align on what we'd like to talk about, we did say that mental health awareness and agenda is very much part of what senior leadership looks at and worries about and keeps them up at night. Ayushi, would you like to start off with some examples of this in terms of what's happening in the mental health and mental well-being of people in our industry?
Sure. Thanks, Mitali, for putting this question, which is like very close personally to my heart, at least. They were the days when we used to talk about physical well-being of people, that we moved on to mental well-being. I think now it's a step ahead. We should also talk about emotional well-being, social well-being of people, and in totality, the total well-being that we have been talking about. Having said that, it's very important that we get to the root. It's not about, okay, we need to be inclusive, we need to have people across different ERGs, different communities, but the core of is how do we understand people? There could be various examples that I can talk about. Maybe a single men looking after their old aged parents. And we talk about sharing partnership, sharing parenting, or equal parenting that we talk about the thing these days, where we have women given maternity leave for long. We also have a father who maybe is at work during the day and at night maybe taking care of the baby and again going to the work next day. So I think it's more about how do we understand people, how do we understand their needs, and as managers in the MR industry in particular, the basic thing is to talk more. As small thing as, okay, maybe a small chai pe talk, okay, let's come understand how that person is faring or what life stage that person is at. Like these days, many people are adopting pets, and when they come to work, they leave their pets behind. Or there could be scenarios when they have a kind of a situation at home when their pet is no more, and we don't have any leave policies around that. But as managers, we can be empathetic to them. We can provide them that guarded assistant during that point of time when that person wanted that emotional support. So I think mental well-being is now a step ahead to moving to emotional well-being, and post-COVID, we have enough and more cases where we move through that stage. So providing that flexibility, understanding the need will be the core essence at this point of time.
Ayushi.
I feel like Ayushi has already talked about one of the key things I wanted to cover, which was the normalizing part of it. And I do think of normalizing and creating access as two things when we're thinking about mental health, because it definitely does make a difference for it to be part of everyday conversation. The subject itself can be very complex. There can be, because everybody's at a different stage in their respective emotional well-being journeys. And there may be some who don't wish to share it and others who are discovering new things, and you really can't expect that everybody will be at the same plane at the same time. So normalizing, I think, creates that space where at least one understands and recognizes that this is a safe enough space for a person to be able to express that there may be any issues pertaining to emotional or social well-being. It's not necessarily saying mental health issues in particular. I've seen the magic that a simple statement like, oh, I'm going to leave early for my therapy today, can do in just suddenly making it understood that it's all right to talk about these things. The second part that I really want to talk about is about access. When I say access, what I mean is we have a very diverse workforce. Market research is built in a way where we bring together a real mix of different cultural backgrounds, different contexts. And what that means is that some of us have the vocabulary, some of us have the exposure to understand how mental health can be navigated, or that it even requires attention, whereas others may have a different point of view, may have accessed it differently. And I think accessibility is about making it known how provisions for mental health can be utilized. I'll give you an example. We've been exploring creating spaces or having sessions, especially for teams that work in the development sector. There is a lot of vicarious trauma that teams get exposed to. And it is something we've been struggling with for some time to try and understand how to provide support, because one takes on a lot when one is confronted with vulnerability, along with wanting to make a difference. And we've been thinking about the fact that, say there is an option available, that there is support for you when it comes to mental health, is everybody in a position equally to utilize it? And so what we're really thinking about is enablement. And so we said, okay, no, a few steps back, maybe we need an orientation, an understanding of what exactly is the provision that's being made. So that has been the two key sort of areas we've been looking at.
Thanks. Paru, would you like to weigh in here?
Yeah, just totally agree with all the points that have been made, and it's such a good space to see commonalities and the normalization and the access and the conversation itself that one can have, and actually one can have without fear. The area that I and perhaps my company is also looking at, I mean, personally, because I do see it in my family, so it's something that we experience, and so my effort as an individual in my company is to look at preventive and what can we do. So of course we accept, solve, normalize it if it happens, but what can we do in our work environment that can prevent it? And I think physical and mental well-being is so connected that the more we connect it, I mean, there are enough studies, we're researchers, we know that there's enough data to say physical activity and how it impacts our mental well-being. So, if the effort is not just, and of course, all of us have the helplines and people, that resources that they can access, but it's also to integrate like Kantar Olympics or any kind of physical activity that you do together to lower the stress. That's just like one spark. But I think the more important bit is, and mental health issues are really on the rise. Either they're on the rise or they're visible and spoken about now. Now, in my capacity as a leader, if I'm to assume that the stress is coming from work, what can I solve for? I can't solve for their personal lives, but what can I solve for? Is their work stress, right? And then when we look at employee feedback, there is a lot about the favorite term is work-life balance. I think we've all heard it before. And honestly, I'm not sure we can deliver it, but I think it's a hygiene to deliver control over your day. It doesn't matter if you have 9 to 5 kind of a job, but if you've planned 9 to 7 and have a movie post that, it should not get cancelled 90 times out of 100, not 10 times. So, and it can be a movie. It doesn't need to be a partner being ill, a child being ill. It can be something fun. And what we can do as leaders really is to look at the planning of projects, to push back on timelines a little bit, and look at a stitch in time so that there's less rework, because we know as an industry we do a fair bit of rework. And look at technology for efficiency. We've got to reduce the stress. We've got to get it right the first time so that the instances of mental stress reduce. I think that along with the access is going to enable us to have fewer instances of people burnout, and I mean, I think we need again a holistic approach of both all the endeavors that we're doing.
Thanks so much. It's so reassuring because I started my career 35 years ago, and we all have these horror stories where when you left office at 5:30, people would look at you and say, "Is it half day today?" and things like that. So it's sort of such a journey that this industry has taken, and so good to hear.
And Mitali, I heard it even 8 years ago, because I mean, just to make a point in a new organization, I would just get up at 5:30 and say, I'm done. And yes, and you have to work through that, because there should be no apology for your own time. If we work on accountability, we don't work on time.
Absolutely. So so this is a fantastic discussion, and I think in any case we've touched upon it already. So we have this term diversity and inclusion, and at one level it can be like one of those very sort of tick box kind of things. But on the other end, if you're really looking about it and saying that, there are different kinds of people, we touched upon, say, language skills, etc. There are various binaries that exist normally in any social groups, especially when you're trying to get a job done together. And it's very important to see that there's no discrimination, that doesn't come in. And often it doesn't come in by intent. It just comes in without realizing, because there are these binaries and there are these differences. I was just wondering, Nandita, if you'd like to talk us through some of what you see, and what are the kind of things you see in the diversity and inclusion space.
Yeah, and I think you've set it off to the right tone, because what we've really been trying to work on, and have, in fact, it has been practice for the larger part of the past year, is diversity and inclusion in the form of a platform for engagement. Because like you said, very often the bias that we carry can be very intrinsic, can be something that is not purposeful, but it does very strongly impact workspaces where you have a lot of diversity on the floor. And you do not want to be in a position where anybody's vulnerability is becoming exploited, and the only way to tackle that is to take it head on. And so what we've been, a lot of the employee engagement and the activities and the events that happen through the year, we decided we're going to adapt all of them to have these important conversations, whether it is application based or just head on addressing bias that we may have. A lot of what is known to be social experiment, activities that you see videos of, we realized that it really got people in the same space, whether it was virtually or physically, to air out and understand that there may be bias that is impacting the way that they operate. And so that engagement is, I think, what is critical beyond representation. What it also very critically does, where, like we said, we're trying to draw people to us and keep them with us. I think what it helps with is, even if you have the provision for hiring for diversity and inclusion, do we know that people who are on various spectrums from various backgrounds feel comfortable approaching us? Do we come across as a space that fosters diversity and inclusion? I think that's where the action shows, which is why we keep pivoting back to, what is culture going to do for us? How is it going to get us to have some uncomfortable conversations, but which are very, very necessary to get the elephant out of the room, and just be able to acknowledge that, we do this as part of our work every day. We empathize with context. We separate ourselves from the individual that we're engaging with, even if we don't align with their opinion. And I think that space needs to very much be created within the workforce, as well as we expand, as we have diversity in age groups, in socioeconomic backgrounds, and religious and cultural backgrounds. It's such a vast cross-section to think of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, I remember an anecdote from one of our awards evenings where we decided that we would have a speaker who typically wouldn't expect to have, who'd gone through a lot of challenges, as somebody who was not typically of a particular, sort of background or gender or something like that. And the moment I remember is after this individual had finished their speech, somebody I didn't know from the audience came and, literally, sort of held my hand, reached out and held my hand and said, "I'm so glad you're talking about it." And I don't know whether for that individual it was he or she had personally had a similar issue, or he or she had seen somebody very close to them struggling with a similar issue. So, I think what you say is very right. Um, uh, Paru, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so I think it's a really important point that you made, Nandita, and I just building on that, I think it's also important that while we seek out recruitment and seek out inclusion and bring them in, and very much like we try to get sociologists, data scientists, anthropologists to cover different hosts of expertise that we need, we don't fit everybody. And I'm not even going to say it's a spectrum or something, but I'm going to talk about it as individuals because everyone's all equal, right? We should not look at averaging out the roles and everybody doing the same thing. And if, say, I have a neurodivergent person who's brilliant with very limited social skills, why do they need to present? When it takes them so much time to come up to that. So why is growth? So growth should look differently. The roles that you do within the team should look different, and we should craft, when we put together all the parts, the sum is more than the whole. So I think if we just look at piecing it together and not expecting the sameness, it'll just go a very, very long way in being truly inclusive, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ayushi?
I think the point which Paru just made is very interesting. It's high time that we move beyond gender, beyond roles. So it's more important to understand, I think, individuality. That will be very important, because I can be of certain mindset, I can be a person of certain community or maybe a certain group, but it's more of what I bring to the table, what I offer. I should be judged basis that and not basis what background I come from. That would be my point. Point two will be that if I know somebody is there in my team or maybe at a society at large, I think it's more important that we create such occasions for those people. Like, I'll share a very personal example. Like a couple of years back, I was interviewing a person for my team, and that person was very open to talk about the challenges that that person has faced, because that person was from LGBT community. And literally at one point of time, that person asked, like, "I'm very open, do you think that this will hamper my interview selection?" I was like, what kind of questions even that person is asking? Because that person has been through that journey. Maybe at one point of time that person got rejected for that reason, but I appreciated that that person was so vocal about it. So I think it's high time that we kind of leave the baggage of community, people. It's more about what that person individuality is and what that person is offering. That will be my take on it.
Thanks. And do you think that there are different parameters or aspects we need to consider in India, Ayushi? When we're looking at diversity and inclusion from the India lens.
I think if we talk about research industry, compare only research industry per se, India versus other, I think we are like far beyond the curve, I would say. Like in our own India research industry, we see a lot of women and a lot of other people that are there on board. So comparing that, I feel that India is like beyond that now. Number two, if I talk about the kind of different team or different mindsets that we have in the industry or in India per se, I personally feel there is a lot of ground to cover, because it's, again, like I mentioned, it's not about gender. It's about having people from different communities at large, because globally we not might see the difference. And there are globally, there are also certain countries where those differences are very evident. So I think personally it's about covering that road. We have covered some ground on that, particularly in India, but again, a road to cover, or like a ground to cover on that front.
I want
Nandita,
to
you want to weigh in there? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to come in with what is idiosyncratic to our culture. We, especially being cultural experts, I think, recognize that there is still an ecosystem within which we all operate and are influenced by. And sometimes I think really emphasizing the diversity and inclusion aspect also makes people conscious. You're very right, Mitali, that there are so many variables that need to be considered when it comes to intersectionality. But I think Ayushi and Paru both spoke about, say, neurodivergence or being on the sexuality or gender spectrum, for example. It often may not be something that someone wants to speak up about. Contrary to the example that Ayushi gave, I may not want to address it at all. And so I think what we need to think of from an Indian context is that sometimes you just have to create the space for a person to comfortably be themselves. And what we're looking to foster is understanding vulnerabilities that may need to be accounted for, understanding, like Ayushi said, individual strengths, but also having that baseline of accommodating. I don't want to use the word accommodating, it sounds very noble, but just creating space for each person to comfortably be who they are and carry their identity with themselves to the extent that they would like. Because we do still go back to our social situations, our digital presence, and we may not be expressing those aspects of our identity there. So that's, I think, something which is very, very specific to our context, that treading the sort of boundary between some convention that still drives us, but our very strong desire to ensure that there is space for everybody and opportunity for everyone.
Thanks, Nandita. Paru?
Ali, I just want to add a point here. I do think in India, we're in a unique, we have a unique opportunity because we are face-to-face fieldwork largely. And we know in research, you have to mirror the people that you're meeting to get the truth out, right? So as part now, whether that was an endeavor which was meant to be inclusive or it was meant to get the right data, but we mirror and need to include many communities, for example, because inclusion is on caste, inclusion is on gender, inclusion is on, on so many things. I mean, we do know you want to understand the youth, you have to send the youth in to understand them. You do know that you want to understand a certain segment of rural, you need to send those, you need to train those people and send them, because you've got to mirror it. You've got to create that empathy. And I think we are, as an industry, in a unique position to employ and train the different, fabric that we have to understand the fabric we have. So in that sense, face-to-face lends itself to more inclusion, in my view, as an industry.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we sort of take for granted is how many languages we deal with in India. Just following up on your point, Paru, and even something like Hindi, which is more or less a national language, is so differently spoken across. And this mirroring and seeing that you have to take care of that. I think we've always done it. I mean, like the Hindi you would use in a questionnaire for Delhi would be totally different from the Hindi you would use in a questionnaire for Bombay, for example. So I think,
and it changes in Lucknow and it changes in Indore. So that's the thing. It's and the average number of languages we use is 9 in a project, which means that many people we will get together for our work. So I think that's a big inclusion opportunity, and a capitalized. It is really.
Absolutely. Just addressing the audience here, if we've talked about a number of topics, if you do have any questions or if you'd like our panel to elaborate on anything, please type in your questions. We'd be happy to answer them if we have time at the end of this. Okay, so coming specifically now to gender, and of course, as about sheer coincidence, we are all women. on this particular panel. But I think that's also very, very interesting, because I think for every woman you have, who may be thinking about their own issues as a woman, there are also men who we're close to, in our families or etc. And we look at the issues that they deal with. So, Nandita, would you like to kick off with some of your observations around this gender diversity topic?
And I think I'll build on the point that Paru had just left off on, the fact that emphasis on DNI as a practice and not just a policy. I think also I've seen it create a workforce that is able to better think about diversity. And I think gender has been one of the aspects along which we have seen that sort of transformation occur, because we've found ourselves thinking consciously about where it creeps in to the work we do, especially when we're working on fast-paced commercial studies. You're very sort of quickly trying to turn around and finish the findings that you're supposed to turn over to the client. But what we've seen is that there is a general sensitivity that has been inculcated, because these efforts are being made within the workplace to be able to identify how gender plays out in our research participants, and how those dynamics, and I'm not talking about very overt understanding of men versus women, it's just about being conscious of what you can possibly find. From a workplace representation point of view, and I'm sure we'll have different perspectives on this, I think one of the things that we've come to understand is that gender can be a complicated subject to navigate in conversation, in the way that we interact with one another, in that there is a lot of polarizing opinion on, it being something that is over sort of addressed, or events that we do on, say, something like a Women's Day. What we've simply found is that whether there is an extreme in the positive or the negative, I think what helps is to be able to kind of tackle it head on, and to be able to say that those opinions can only be understood and empathized with if we create a space where everybody has access to a narrative around it. And so what we encourage people to do is share experiences. That is where sensitivity gets built. I think one of the things that we have definitely seen is that there is a bit of a skew in our case towards having women on the work floor. But that has its own sort of interesting dynamics. I'll defer to the other panelists to speak about it.
Paru, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Actually, I didn't know I was lucky till I went. This is just a personal anecdote to say. I want to make 2 points. I didn't know I was selected as amongst some X number of women. I didn't know that I was selected amongst the women to be mentored at some global level till I entered the room, fortunately in London, which made the whole thing worth it, because you got travel. And we were going to be mentored because we were whatever ex-leaders and stuff like that. And when I heard the stories from the more developed Western world, and I realized how lucky I was, because I've always felt in now 28 years that I worked in a gender agnostic environment. I have not gained from it. I have not lost anything. I've got flexibility, and I've given flexibility regardless of gender. It depends on who needs it. So I really feel lucky that we've been gender agnostic. I mean, that's how I feel about my work. But I think the point I want to make is a little bit different on gender, and being on an all-women's panel is probably a scary part at the moment on what I'm going to say. But I think it's important to look at the world's history and look at history has shown that who's dominant and who's not dominant over time. Gender is one of it. It can be many countries, races, etc. And when progress or equalizations are done at the cost of another, it all often comes with steep repercussions. So we've got to be ready for that. Like when you talk gender, and we've honestly, all of us, I'm sure all of us have done a lot of work on gender spectrum, etc. But I don't think we can miss the fact, and I may be talking a bit elitist, but I'm talking about people on the call today, probably listening to our call today. I'm talking about people for whom ads are made, right? Because you don't make it for the last denominator. The creative focus has a lot been on the growth of the woman as a protagonist, as an equal partner. And sometimes it's at the cost of men. And when this equality is by bringing down men in any way, by making them visitors of their own bastions, the response is something like the movie Animal or Andrew Tate. You will. So I think the big point, and I feel as an individual passionately about it, is that what we are building for is a capacity to accept differences. And no one's better than the other, really. And let's not live in a world of averaging or generalizing. We all have our strengths and roles. It's not about I can do it better, you can do it less. It's about I can do some things you can't do. As women, within men, I mean, as women and men. And when we're creating a sense of self, there has to be sensitivity towards the self of others. So it really is, there has to be a balance in what we are doing. And in our effort to create a balance, you can't pull somebody else down. And I think the response, if you just look around the world, in gender and in race, you can see what's happening. And perhaps the nugget is that we build equity and not equality, and we build it in a way that doesn't sort of reduce. It doesn't reduce anybody.
Thanks, Paru. Ayushi, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah. So Paru made a very valid point that in kind of maybe embracing one part of gender, we are kind of losing out the another. Like I'll share a very personal example that I faced recently. So there is a new father in my team. And that person was talking to me other day. The wife is away in his hometown. Like, Aisha, I'm missing out on small things. Okay, baby turned today. Baby said first word today. And he's missing out on that. So he was just sharing his thoughts. And like, why don't you take leaves, go a couple of days, rest with your family and come back refreshed? So why I quoted this example was that we talk a lot about parenting, women taking leaves and all. But in a way, we are losing men behind. There could be some men who are very emotional. They want to see that growth of a child. So I think we need to kind of break that shackle of gender, move beyond that. It's like embracing everyone and everyone at the same time, because every individual is different. I may be of a certain gender, but maybe I'm thinking my likes or needs could be very much related to another gender. Like I have all men in my team, mostly couple leaving behind couple of ladies that are there in my team. Sorry ladies, no being partial over here, but yeah, at the same time it's breaking that shackle, respecting individuality, respecting individual emotions. And like I mentioned before also, it's like leaving no one behind. That will be important.
Thanks, Ayushi. We have a couple of questions. We have one question from Meghna, which I paraphrased to say that she says that, given the complexity of the work we do, how do we actually put the kind of things we've talked about into everyday practice? And of course, I will refer her to your winning sort of presentations, which we do have on our YouTube. But is there the one thing each, perhaps, which we can briefly just talk about in everyday practice? What happens? We can go around the table.
I mean, it's a very pertinent starting point to saying how do we bring this into what we're doing. And I think even in our little alignment discussion, that's exactly what I said, that people will want to know how do you go past theory. And I think it has to do with, one, the organizational mindset. It has to be a space where people can bring up these subjects and engage on them and talk about them. And I think it's and I'll speak to why we started focusing on culture and thinking of having our values put together and then holding session after session on what these values mean and how you can interpret them. It came precisely from there, that when you do repeatedly engage with some of the core values that bring you together as a collective, it gives you a kind of median to think of when you it impacts the way that you conduct yourself, and it gives the space for all of us to hold each other accountable, not in a negative way, but once you know that the ecosystem is something that is conducive to addressing each of these subjects. We've talked about mental health, we've talked about diversity, it just slowly trickles into practice. And if it doesn't, then you have a reminder in the form of an environment that is equally clothing, which is why we feel that it becomes a kind of starting point to say this is the way that we think things can be done, and this is what you borrow from. It's also a bit of a directive to say, if you don't know how to navigate the situation, then here's a few things that we know have proved effective and led us to this point as an organization. That's what we do at Purple.
Thanks. Anything else? Just one brief specific thing that you'd like to add, or do you think it's been covered and perhaps we can move to the next question?
I think one we all have like culture or kind of
I've lost her.
Yeah, I think there's the internet's just blipped there. Paru, do you want to jump in, or?
Yeah, I think actually the question's well covered, and that we all would do something as an industry to make sure that we really act on the things that we are saying. Now, whether it is about going into the field with the right people, whether it's implementing strategies and policies at workplace, building team dynamics which work, I think all these things in a small or a big way are employed. Sorry, Ayushi, I think is back.
Yeah, Ayushi, sorry, your network dropped, so we didn't hear your answer. Yeah. Would you
so
like
the
to
point that I was the point that I was making was that we have a particular culture or various initiatives that we kind of take at an organization level, but I think at times what is important is giving that assurance or maybe reassurance to our people, to our direct reportees, or to our like team members at large is important at times.
Absolutely. So I think we have just probably about a minute left. Perhaps any one of you can answer this question. It comes from Sharma, and she talks about that, the paradox of being humane is that attrition still happens. And, this perhaps is because many of us are of a certain age, but there is a sense to say that the younger generation, etc., is somebody we want to attract and we want to keep, and we want to manage the attrition. So are there any ideas on, how we can nurture and sustain the inheritors, as she so beautifully put it, who will take our industry forward? Paru, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think I want to start by saying, of course, we want to keep them. But personally, with gratitude, I enjoy the time they stay, and with wishes, I let them go. Because we've got to recognize that the younger generation, and even when we were younger, you could be a little bit of a nomad spirit, right? You've got to recognize that you can't solve for everything, and accepting it actually is a large part in them getting a situation where they want to stay. So the more you hold on really tightly, the shackles are kind of on, is one feeling, because it is a little bit of give and take. Having said that, I think all of us want to know we are making a difference and we are having an impact. Even if you're the last, so when I was a management trainee, if I could present, and I remember my boss saying, you know the data really well, and you're presenting to a CMO, and he said, there's nobody who knows the data better than you in that room. So how does it matter that you're a management trainee? That kind of confidence and that kind of belief, when somebody else has a belief even before you have it, goes a long way in building loyalty, giving chances. So I think first is an acceptance that options are different. And they say, right, you want to keep somebody, let them fly, give an option and let them go and come back. But also be conscious of a healthy culture where when they're there, they're recognized for the impact they're making, and sometimes even demand quite high. Don't be scared, because when you don't ask for what you need as within a project, for example, there's a tension on both the sides. So very clear expectations, very clear on deliverables, and just enjoy the journey together. It may not last forever.
Absolutely. And I think what you can hope for is they have only good things to say about their time with you when they leave,
Yeah,
So I think
I
that's
think
a
that's the
beautiful
most
point,
important.
perhaps. Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful point to perhaps end today's session. It's been an amazing session. Thank you so much again, Nandita, Ayushi, Paru, for giving us your time. Thank you for attending this session. Just to sign off, I want to remind you that the theme is celebrating research. It's about the joys and achievements in market research. And we are having a couple of sessions next week where we're giving you a chance to rerun and revisit the amazing sessions where we have joy and fun from our very own Shobha Prasad and her slightly critical way of having a laugh at ourselves and through her cartoons. So do join us for these sessions. We will be sharing the links for them shortly. On the 30th of April, he's going to take us through the other side of insights. And on May the 2nd, which is actually the Market Research Day, that's the day that it all happens, she's talking about Insights 2024, work and play in unprecedented times. So thank you for being with us, audience. Thank you for being with us, panelists. And yes, and let's celebrate our profession as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitali. Thank you, MRSI.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye then.